I don't know how many of you have read the book, the author of which we have with us here today, Cindy Adams, but I started to read it yesterday, and I can just give you a few very brief excerpts. It'll give you a little bit of the flavor and an idea of the book, not because I'm going to promote the sale of it, but because I'm pretty sure you're all going to be interested in reading it. I think it's one of the, it's the last book that has been written on a rather, shall we say, peculiar personality, or at least one who is a matter of considerable discussion, debate, differences of opinion. Cindy Adams opens the book, which incidentally, I think you probably know, is an autobiography. It opens this way: the simplest way to describe Sukarno is to say that he is a great lover. He loves his country, he loves his people, he loves women, he loves art, and best of all, he loves himself. I'm not sure whether this is due to the insight of Sukarno or of his autobiographer. But at any rate, some of the things that we read and have heard about Sukarno seems to bear out this opening paragraph. Just one or two more paragraphs to give you a little idea of the book. One high-ranking British diplomat still doesn't see that the key to Sukarno turns easily if it is oiled with love. In a recent letter to 10 Downing Street, he wrote, quote, "President Sukarno is ungovernable, unpredictable, and uncontrollable. He is like a cornered rat." And then he goes on to comment, "A nice word for a man who has devoted his entire life to his country, a man who spent over 13 years in prison and exile because he believed in an ideal. Maybe I didn't see eye to eye with him on everything, but a rat? My heart stopped dead when this letter came into my possession." He finished by saying he'd see to it that Sukarno gets the worst possible press. Well, this is the first reference to the press, and as you know, the press is very much, at least our American press right now, is engaged in what we might call a Cold War with Sukarno, or at least is the object of a Cold War that Sukarno has declared against the American press. And this is a matter of some interest to us, and perhaps Cindy Adams will touch on this, as well as the personality of the man that she's made the subject of her book. She is incidentally going to Indonesia early next week, I believe, and she will then be, I think, perhaps the only American correspondent in the country. And perhaps we might assign her the confidential diplomatic mission of trying to negotiate a settlement of the Cold War between the American press and Sukarno. Just to say a few words of introduction or further introduction, I might ask Will Ausler, who is a friend of the authors, to come up and say a few words and perhaps introduce the other. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say Will Ausler. I meant Will Yoland. Or Will Ausler is another friend. Why I might mention then who is here. We have Will Ausler. Will, would you stand here on the left next to Mrs. Adams? And we have Joey Adams. Joey, would you stand and take a bow? I think it might be interesting to get Joey Adams' a version, too, of Sukarno. I wonder if it's going to coincide with his wife's. Richard Barr is our public relations man here. Richard Barr. And then Will Yoland, who has a few words to say. Will Yoland.
Thank you, Joe. I have very few words to say. I knew Cindy Adams when she was Cindy Heller, and sure was. She was a 15-year-old kid, and the most popular kid on the block. And to find her now a glamorous international figure is very awe-inspiring, and I'm glad to welcome her and her handsome husband, Joey Adams, to the Overseas Press Club.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, honey. Thank you, Joe. Most of you people have been handling headlines long before I could spell the word dictator. So for me to be addressing you is a little like Teddy Kennedy telling Jim Farley the ins and outs of politics. But I will do my best. I can only discuss that which I know best, and that's Sukarno, the man. There's a dichotomy in Sukarno. He is half emperor and half peasant. He lives in sybaritic splendor in a palace with rugs you can sink into up to here, crystal chandeliers, a multi-million-dollar art collection, everything the very best, but that is not really where he lives. He actually lives in a 5-room caretaker's cottage on the grounds, in which he doesn't even have his own WC, in which he has an L-shaped dining area, such as many people might have in a little Manhattan apartment. He might sit down at a table laden with solid gold silverware and crystal goblets and damask tablecloths, but he will eat with his fingers. He was so poor that he never had utensils until he had passed the formative years. You will see him in his uniform and his black cap, the beachy, which is the symbol of nationalism, and which he admits in his very frank, candid, and I might say gamey autobiography, that this black cap has become the symbol of self-defense because he is getting a little bald on top. And Sukarno will also tell you that he says, after all, Muslims are supposed to shampoo their hair after they have had a love affair with a woman. He says, naturally, I'm losing my hair, as anybody can understand. The Sukarno that I have seen after being with him steadily for 2 years, 5, 6, 7 hours a day, the Sukarno that my Joey has seen, is not the man in the uniform and the black cap. That he is doing only for show. The Sukarno we see is a man who will receive us in pajamas. Or the day he feels like dressing formally, he'll be in an underwear shirt, slacks, and bare feet. This is the kind of Sukarno that I know. He looks like a tram car conductor. I will tell you how we met. I'm sure that must be a question you'd all like to know. In 1961, my husband, Joey Adams, had been for many years president of the American Guild of Variety Artists. In such capacity, he was asked by President Kennedy to head the first cultural exchange unit to Southeast Asia. And I was filing for North American Newspaper Alliance and had interviewed many chiefs of state before, like Prime Minister Nehru, President Eisenhower. There were many people, so it wasn't exactly basic training on Sukarno. And when we arrived in Indonesia, I put in a request to do an interview. He granted it. My first question, I would say, probably established the sort of instant rapport. I asked him, why do you wear the uniform? And he gave me a prepared, stet answer. He said, because I am the supreme commander of 100 million Indonesians and my people need a symbol of authority to look up to. Well, you know, some of us, we've never had anything to fear. Reading, writing, and royalty is not taught in our schools. It's on-the-job training. And thank the Lord, we've always been kind of free-thinking Yankees who can say what we feel. I've just never known how to be afraid. And so when he gave me that prepared answer, he says, because I'm the supreme commander. And when he just finished, I just looked at him and I sort of grinned and said, I don't think so, honey. I think you wear it because you know darn well you look handsome in it. Well, there was a space of a heartbeat, and then he started to laugh. He says, yeah, you're right, but don't tell anybody. I said, you can count on me. I wouldn't tell a soul. The end of the half hour, his aide-de-camp came in and said, your next appointment is here. And he said, cancel it. At the end of the hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, and 2.5 hours. By that time, I was just a mass of nerves and perspiration, and I just couldn't do anymore. So figuring my sense of humor and the sassy irreverence had taken me so far, it would just have to take me the rest of the way. And so I said, listen, Mr. President, maybe you've got nothing better to do, but I have to file a column. Will you excuse me? And so he stood up, walked me to my car, and like any well-brought-up president would do, he kissed me goodbye on the cheek. And waved me bye-bye from the top of the stoop. Well, I figured that's the last time I'm ever going to see Mr. Sukarno. But the Lord, in his mysterious ways, I guess, had other plans for me. Sukarno read what I had written. It wasn't written with a feather, but it wasn't written with an axe either. The man is an egotist, he's dynamic, he's magnetic. He is actually putting the whole world on, and he knows it. And I wrote it that way. He sent me a letter of thanks, a handwritten personal letter, and I didn't know what to do when I got a letter from a chief of state, but I thought I'd best answer it. And he at that time was doing some things, as per usual, that were not in the best interests of American-Indonesian relations, and I answered it. But ladies and gentlemen, when you're just a plain garden-variety American, and you're writing to a supreme, omnipotent dictator of the fifth largest country in the world, you do not believe he's really going to be receiving your letters. You're kind of writing into a vacuum. And so I said, listen here, Mr. President, I don't think what you're doing is entirely wise, and if you should really change your ways because you're alienating the United States of America. I get a letter back. And this, to make a long story very short, we became pen pals. And after a while, my letters were not being received there. They were not arriving. And the President was aware of this, and so he called in the United States ambassador, and that's where the State Department became involved in my life. Ambassador Jones then wrote me and said, Cindy, would you please send all your future letters to the American Embassy, care of me, so that I will have reason to have entree into the palace, and I will hand-deliver this to the President. So I said, yeah, I guess so. I felt sort of silly. My husband and I are sitting there writing letters to a man out there, but this is exactly how it happened. Then 2 years later, he had what he calls, quote, a transcendental vision. I don't know what it is, but he is a mystic. You scratch any Javanese, you will find a mystic beneath the surface. And he does things on instinct. He likes you on instinct, or he hates you on instinct. He hires people in his cabinet the same way. He rules with emotion, not logic. And for some reason, the, quote, American lady, only he added an adjective, the noisy American lady, he wanted to come back and work with him on his autobiography. Joey and I returned, and this is where we began to have a little of our downhill arguments. The book was, he agreed, it was his idea to write this autobiography as told to Cindy Adams, and he wanted to write it. He said the United States will never, ever agree with Sukarno. That is all right. He didn't expect that they would. He only wanted that they might understand him. He says the American people have opened their doors to immigrants of every nation all over the world. Perhaps they might open the doors of their minds to another immigrant thought. He said, you know, you people think that after Sukarno is gone, you will have someone else who will be pro-Western or pro-American. He says, not so. Even Nasution, the general, is not pro-West or pro-America. He is only anti-communist. The only thing he is pro is Indonesia. And he says Sukarno is, after all, an Indonesian. And so you must be able to understand me and how I think in order for the day, perhaps when I step off the stage, that you will understand the next man who may take my place. And we decided that this was going to be a very, very honest book. The State Department says it is so honest that his political enemies can use it to their advantage. The people who don't like him, and of course they are legion, admit they have never read quite such a frank book. Hand in hand with this is perhaps why he picked me. I can't give you an answer, except that perhaps it was a little bit of propinquity. I was in the right place at the right time. Also, when you begin to understand Sukarno, you realize he was born of a Javanese Muslim theosophist father and a Balinese Hindu Buddhist mother. He just does not think according to our nice, neat, white Western ways. He thinks according to mysticism. And he was a mother's baby, if you can go back and believe him as a child. He was a mother's baby. He had only one other person in his family, and that was an elder sister. And they were so poor that he couldn't be even given the one rice bowl a day, and so he was parceled out to a maternal grandmother in his early formative years. And you see that as the little boy is growing up, women play a very important part in his life. This is continued on even further in his life. And so even apart from his love for women physically, he is extremely drawn to them emotionally. Perhaps a psychiatrist would say it's It's a constant search for love. I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist. But this does probably have some bearing. And so he could only actually work with a woman. Perhaps he will feel they are more simpatico. Perhaps he feels they are compassionate. Maybe he thinks they are more subject to his charm. All of those things, I imagine, have a part. But only a woman could have gotten this story out of him. For instance, when we started to work on the Japanese occupation, Sukarno was a collaborator, a good, fat collaborator. He didn't want to discuss it very much. He wanted to gloss over it. I had done all my homework, all my research, so that before I got there, I knew the answers to a great many of the questions before I asked. Sukarno was beginning to cancel appointments, or he was getting a headache, or he would have other guests along at the time when I was coming, all to delay talking about this Japanese occupation. For him to rip the adhesive tape off of his memory, those wounds which have barely begun to heal, was very painful for him. And one day he began to thunder at me from 6:30 in the morning till 1:30 in the afternoon, until I was almost reduced to jelly. And he started to scream at me, and he said, "Stop picking on me, stop digging into me, stop baiting me, make this more of a fantasy, leave me alone, stop asking questions of everybody." And I figured, well, I'm going to go for broke. This is the crisis. And I stood up and I said, "Now let me tell you a little something. I don't need you. There's nothing you can do for me. I'm not an Indonesian. I'm an American. I'm a free citizen. I'm here with my husband, and I have enough money to get home. You can't threaten to put me in jail. You can't take my parents out of jail. There isn't one thing you can do for me. And I will not tell a lie. I will not commit a lie by commission. I don't mind doing it by omission, but not by commission. And it's not going to be a Valentine." And I said, "Don't ever forget, you sent for me. I didn't ask for this job." I don't know where I ever got the nerve, but I did. And to Sukarno's credit, the one thing I will say is that the veins stood out on his neck and perspiration was all over his face. And he said to me, just one word, he said, "All right." And I said, "I want permission to see everyone who is behind bars, your political enemies as well. If we think it shouldn't be in the book, it won't be, but I want to see them all. And I don't want to have to tell you where I got any information from. I will be honest with you completely, but I don't want any obstacles." And he said, "Okay." And when you read it, you will see that he says, "Yes, I sacrificed hundreds of thousands of Indonesians, knowing they were going to their deaths, knowing they would never come back alive. I did it. I knew they were going to their deaths. But I did it because I thought it was the best way for my country, because I thought in turn the Japanese would give me political concessions." And so we have such things like this in the book, and it could only have been done with a woman who could have gotten away with it. I am neither apologist nor defender for the man. He's not Little Boy Blue. But in explaining this little talk, I am trying to explain his ways, not explain him away. Now, I don't know how much time I should have. Shall I take up his anti-Americanism or communism or what?
Why don't you go on another 5 or 10 minutes?
Yes? All right, you just stop me whenever, okay? All right. I would like to tell one story particularly about the press, and occasionally he has not had exactly a fair shake. Joey and I sat in the front row of the audience the day he made that speech which was where he was supposed to have said, "To hell with United States aid." Ladies and gentlemen, he never said it. Joey and I were there. Sitting in the row next to us were the American ambassador and his wife, Howard P. Jones. Howard would have had to leave had he said anything against the United States. He didn't. He said something out of context about, "We need money, we're in terrible shape, but perhaps we're almost better off if we don't take it so that we can fight our own problems our own way." A reporter, who will be nameless, from a wire service which I shall also not name, never came out of the air-conditioned comfort of the Indonesia Hotel. There was a girl there who was listening to the speech. She told him what she thought Sukarno had said. She did it in quick shorthand, mental shorthand. He knew a headline when he heard it or when he made it up. He filed the speech which said, "Sukarno says the U.S. can go to hell with its aid." This ricocheted around the world very quickly. From Kuala Lumpur, with a Malaysia dateline, of course, being very anti-Indonesia, they blew it up very large. To the credit of the United States, no paper here printed the first story. They didn't believe it, but Singapore and Malaysia did. Sukarno got it in big, bold headlines. He was so infuriated at the unfair shake he had gotten that he said, "If this is the way I'm going to be treated, when I really did try to say something proper, then the hell with it, I might as well really say it." Then he went out and he said, "The United States can go to hell with its aid." He never said it the first time. He only said it the second time out of pique. Ambassador Howard Jones went on television later to recant the story and say it really wasn't true, but it ended up somewhere on page I don't know where, and nobody ever really knew the true story. Now, as for his anti-Americanism, 1958 was his first time, 1956 was the first time he came here. He was then a hero to the United States of America. When he left, he was traveling on his first trip outside Indonesia, and he visited China and Russia, and he came back with a philosophy called guided democracy, which to us sounds like something the Marx brothers set down. But to the Indonesians, to them, it was kind of workable. We didn't like it. We started to call him names. This is Sukarno talking, not me. We started to call him names. In 1958, we had the now infamous, you all know the story, of Alan Pope, the man who was supposedly a CIA man who was bombing Indonesia, which is one of the blots on our relationship with Indonesia. It can't be talked away. It was the case. So you have 1956, then 1958. Then you have him meeting Eisenhower in about 1960, and Eisenhower kept him waiting for about 20 minutes at the entrance of the White House. You mustn't forget, ladies and gentlemen, that brown skin is thin skin. A man who for 350 years has been under the thumb of the white Westerner has simply got to equate in terms of equality with Westerners and white people and presidents of equal stature. And you have a man who is consumed with ego. And so we begin to get a further pulling away. Mr. Kennedy did the greatest healing job, if we can call it that. He understood what had happened. And Sukarno says in his autobiography, were John F. Kennedy alive today, our countries would not have drifted so far apart. Another thing that I don't know how many of you might be aware, one of the reasons that he has gone to the left, he is not a communist ideologically. He gives you several reasons why he is not. A, he is a devout believer in God as a Muslim, and he gives you many reasons for why he believes in God. 2, he is just too egotistical to be dominated, to be a satellite. And in his slide towards China, his egotism was such, he didn't know he was losing control. We sitting here could see it. I don't think he was ever aware of it. 3rd reason he is not ideologically a communist is because he is a supranationalist. And communism is internationalism, or a one-world nation. However, he has leaned to the far left because it is expeditious, it serves his purpose. Sukarno says, quote, in relation to China, Russia, and in relation to the Japanese occupation, and this is a direct quote, he said, I will cooperate with the devil and hell if I think it will help my country at the moment. One of the slides to the far left has been the fact that there have been 11 assassination attempts on Sukarno. The majority, almost all, have been by the Muslim far right. When Sukarno spent all his years in prison, they were Dutch-administered prisons, and he learned much about Jesus and much about Moses, much about the Bible. And so he said when he becomes president, as long as he is president, he will never allow Christianity or Judaism to be thrown out of his country. And so Catholicism and Christianity in all its forms, and a little of Judaism, does flourish. But it is 99 9/10% Muslim in that country, and there is a fanatical right-wing Muslim party that has tried to assassinate him to make a Muslim state. And because the far right has tried so hard to get rid of him, he has therefore leaned towards the far left. That is one of the many reasons why he has done so. Listen, I can go on and on, but I think perhaps maybe I'd just better throw the floor open to questions. Don't you think so?
All right, yeah, we can do that.
Is there? Thank
you. Will Osler will take the questions. So, Will, would you come up and repeat them for radio?
Dorothy Omansky wants to know, what is Sukarno now? He's not a communist. He's not a Christian. What is he?
I'd say he's an egotistical Sukarnoist who is out on a limb at the moment. He is an extreme individualist. He has somehow, with his political theories, he has alienated China, he has alienated the United States, and he has alienated Russia. It would seem at the moment that he is reigning rather than ruling at this particular moment. I would not count him out, however, because he's an extremely able politician. If you have read his story and you have spent the years that I have in his life, you will know that this has happened to him repeatedly through the years, The general who saved him from the coup on October 1st, General Nasutian, was the same Colonel Nasutian who attempted a coup against him in 1952. 1948, there was an attempted communist overthrow. Each time he comes back. And it would seem right now that if General Nasutian could get rid of him and govern, wouldn't you seem to think he would? He can't. Sukarno, at the moment, has the love of the major portion still of his people. There's only a small degree that are intellectuals. The rest are the peasantry. And Sukarno today still remains the only cohesive factor in that 10,000-island archipelago. And I think that he'll pick himself up again.
Larry Stassen's question is, what is the condition or health of Sukarno at the present time?
Sukarno is 64 years old. He is as reasonably healthy as any man of 64 who is beset by hourly crises, daily tensions. He is torn inside. His doctors say he has ulcers and give him medicine for it. He doesn't even take it. He is so filled with medicines and for other things. He suffers with kidney trouble. He calls one kidney a stone factory. And he will not permit himself to be operated on for mystic reasons. He believes that the moment he is touched with a knife, he will go. He says, I am an unhappy man, a lonely man, a tortured man. I have no friends whatsoever. I spend nights walking around my palace by myself. Occasionally I will go out and walk in the garden. And any man who is as unhappy and tortured as I cannot be too healthy. However, for the years that Joey and I have spent there, we have read the stories, the New York papers that have been flown to us, where he supposedly is dying or he's on his last legs. At the time we read that with him, he is throwing a gala and he was dancing till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. So we have been saying for so long that he is nearly dying. Sooner or later, we're going to be right. But at this very moment, I would not say, I don't know. When I get there, I'll know next on Monday. He is not as seriously ill as the papers have been saying.
Thank you.
Are you going back at his invitation, and are you going to do any more writing on him?
At this particular time, I am going back at his invitation because he wants an official copy of the book for the Indonesian archives, gold-leafed, hand-tooled, leather, and that kind of thing. I plan to do several other books, yes. I have not firmed up anything at the moment. I will be the only correspondent, but I have not exactly decided for whom I will correspond, because should I be Sukarno's invitee, and this makes any difficulty, then I will have to make a change accordingly, because I wouldn't compromise it.
I'm going to put the very last question. It's quite obvious that our ambassador has little or no influence at all on Sukarno. Possibly Cindy Adams has some. Would she take up this question of the expulsion of the American correspondents? Does she think it's possible to get the American correspondents back?
I most assuredly intend to take up the question of American correspondence after I get out as much as I can.
I think we can give Cindy Adams 24 hours after she returns to American soil. Thank you very, very much, both Mr. and Mrs. Adams.
Mine is an extension of the question that Adele asked, and that is, what are the steps that we can take to the road back to what the lawyers call rapport?
What are the steps? What are the steps that can be taken to the road back to what the lawyers call rapport or rapport?
I may suffer from oversimplification. To stand here before a learned group and give you an answer in a moment or two, I will be the one to suffer, because I will only seem awfully either stupid or shallow or quick. But to give you a very quick kind of answer, Sukarno loved the United States. He says, I courted that glamorous woman Columbia since my childhood until he started to pull away. He again loved the United States with Kennedy. He met Johnson originally when he was vice president. And if you will allow me, I think that a Texan and an Asian, a Texan is only a Western Asian. It would seem to me that both presidents are aggressive, impulsive, egotistical, driving, and it would seem that they would have much together were they to meet on equal footing. Perhaps at the moment we must wait for a settling down process, for Indonesia's internal strife to reach some sort of water level. After that, it would be my prayer that Johnson and Sukarno can meet, because their warmth together would definitely do more than our millions of dollars, our hard-nosed diplomats, and our hardware could do. Did you want to say something, Joey? Oh, tell him.
This is Mr.
Joey.
Joey Adams, Candy Adams' husband.
Cindy. Cindy is bad enough for a
Cindy,
reporter.
Cindy, not Candy. Irving Ausler. First of all, I was also concerned that Cindy or I in any way would sound like we were alibying or apologizing, but of course that's not true. We are first, second, third, foremost red, white, and blue Americans. And naturally we're interested in our country. And I was leaving Indonesia this last time. The president ran a little breakfast for us. And being a juggler as he is, he juggles all sides all the time. He invited the Russian ambassador, the Chinese ambassador, the German, so on, everybody sitting around this breakfast table. And he offered a toast to us and thanked us and said he was going to name a street called Jalan Adams. I found out later this was a dead end. But he offered a toast to Cindy and thanked her as his great collaborator and said this was the author of the book and how much he was grateful to her for bringing his story to the world. And then when he was finished, he sat down. I was way on the other side of the table. Cindy was sitting right next to him, as always. I stood up and I raised my glass and I said, I offer a toast to my president. And before it was misunderstood, I added Lyndon Baines Johnson. And Sukarno was the first to jump up. After all, the Chinese ambassador was there, the Russian ambassador was there. He was the first to jump up and walked across to me and clinked my glass and said, I drink to that. He's a fine man. I hope we can get together someday. Well, I hope that happens. I think it's very important that these two great leaders is. The reason I was so anxious that my dear wife write this story is, and that we read it, is because all dictators or leaders or heads of state telegraph their punches. If we had read Hitler and believed what he read, we could have done a lot of things then. If we read Nehru's story and Gandhi's story and Christian Menon and all the great leaders of the world, good or bad, we would know what they feel and what they think. I think it's important to know what he wants or what he thinks, not to give it to him, but at least have an understanding. And I pray that President Johnson will call someday and invite him to the United States, because this is what he'd like more than anything in the world. I pray that if he does that, then he will be in the middle of the road where he belongs, because as Cindy said so well, he is an Indonesian, first, second, and third, like I am an American, like you are Americans. And no matter what the story is, right or wrong, you are an American. That's how you've got to fight. You can't burn your draft card. You've got to say what you are and what you think and fight with your country. And that's all he is trying to do. Of course, the other stories about the president are true, too. We know him as liking girls, and naturally, when I went with my wife, I made sure that I was there all the time. True, he invited both of us, perhaps hoping I wouldn't show up. But I left all my duties and I went there, and just one amusing story. As I was leaving Indonesia, and I left Cindy there to do a television show that she was doing with President Sukarno for Jack Parr. And he did everything she asked him to do. He took off his shoes and he walked around in the underwear shirt, just without his cap, so that America would know what he's like. And I was leaving Cindy there for another 3 or 4 weeks, and I said, Mr. President, I am leaving. You're a Muslim, you can have 4 wives, and you do. You can have a little girl here and there if you like. And Muslims are like that, but I got one little working wife. One little gal who's knocking her brains out, her fingers are tight and torn from typing your story. It's all I got. I have nobody else. I said, when you get finished with this, please send her back as quickly as possible and take care of her. He said, Joey, don't worry about a thing. I'll treat her like my own. I said, that's what I'm afraid of. He said, give you my word, I won't let anybody come near her and nobody will touch you. I said, Mr. President, I'm not worrying about anybody. I'm worried about you.
But he had that sense of humor. And I think, since this is only a fight between the Western world and communism, and this is the whole story in a nutshell, and I don't want to oversimplify it, as Cindy told you, but if we understand and try to get together, if this is what we want, if we try to get together, it is possible. I know he loves America. He has called me and wired me and cabled me. He loves everything American. I'm bringing him socks, stretch socks from Saks Fifth Avenue. He only wants Arrow shirts. His material must be American-made. Even the perfume he brings for his wives, that's a lot of perfume, must be Mary Chess, American perfume. So he loves America, he loves the people, he knows every movie star, movie actress. I know that we could get together if we can get together on personal basis and not on a diplomatic basis.
I think no, I think we're going to close now. All right? Yes, go ahead. We'll take two then. Mm-hmm.
If President Sukarno ever discussed with you why he withdrew from the United Nations?
Did President Sukarno ever discuss with you why he withdrew from the United Nations?
Yes, ma'am. He gave several completely detailed reasons, a couple of which quickly I will give you. One, he says the basis of the United Nations should be in some area outside of the environs of either power bloc. Perhaps it should be in Switzerland, but it should not be in the United States or Russia or in China. Two, he says the United Nations does not give proper representation proportionately to Asians, because in an Asian dispute, in the Mafalindo dispute of Malaya, Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia, in the Malaysian crisis, the plebiscite, which was sponsored by the United Nations, which was sent over to sound out the feelings of the people of Malaysia, this plebiscite was headed by an American named Michael Moore. And he says it should have been headed by an Asian. He will give you several reasons. He goes into it in the autobiography, absolutely point by point.
Well, let me just follow that and ask Cindy, what do you think his real reason was?
Peak.
What we suspected.
Peak, when Malaysia was seated in the Security Council.
I'll repeat the question.
I'd like to suggest that Mr. Adams send his prayers to the State Department. He wants the President to call Mr. Karno rather than just to pray. We might get more action. But I'd like to direct the question to Mrs. Adams, and that is, what kind of preparation, feminine preparation, you made for these interviews? What kind of dress, makeup, and so on?
What kind of feminine preparation did you make for your interviews?
First of all, the State Department is well aware of what we are doing. We are very much in league with them. We are on your side, don't forget. We are with you. As for my makeup, I didn't change anything. I always tried to be as attractive as I could be in that heat. I realized it was a point in my favor, and so I did try. But I didn't make any other concessions at all.
I hope that answered what was in your mind.
Just a minute. It also answers what was in my mind, too.
Does anyone else have any other question in his or her mind? Would you please just put the question so we can get an answer?
Where is it going? Either with American aid, without American aid, with communist aid, without communist aid?
I think the question is, where is he going? We're not quite clear. Left, right, center, just where?
I think perhaps this is his problem, frankly. I don't think he knows where to go. Sukarno is a revolutionary. He is not an administrator. He does things from spirit, from emotion. He has raised his people who used to live on 2.5 cents a day to not appreciably more, but he has given them, in a country where it is so poor that even 0.5 cent has value, he has raised them emotionally and spiritually so that we here can't imagine that there are too many achievements, but they are now able to tell off the white world. They are free, not in our concept, but in theirs. He has done other things. His achievements have been, for instance, in a country with 86 regional dialects, such as Javanese, Balinese, Sumatran, and so forth. He has one cohesive language, which as yet China and India do not yet have. This might sound roundabout, but I'm coming back to your question. And also, when he took over the presidency, he had 6% literacy in 1945. Today, 21 years later, he has 100% literacy between the ages of 13 and 45. He has done emotional kinds of things, but he is not an administrator. I think perhaps were he, and if he really had a formula, he would not be in the position he is in now. I don't really know where he is going. I only know where he's been.
Well, we'll take our last question here from this gentleman. So we're going to have to cut off. Go ahead.
Could I ask you how the book is going? The reason I ask you, I happen to be Catholic literary critic, Vatican Council correspondent, just in from London, and to the best of my knowledge, few, if any, of the Catholic publications ever received review copies.
Well, the question is, how is your book going?
I'm very sorry that you haven't received review copies. We must have a Protestant publisher. But I will certainly see that is... Jim Byrne, will you please make a note of that? The book is going extremely well. It was published late November, and it's already entering its 5th printing. We are now in Japanese, Arabic, Dutch, name the language, we are in it as far as I know. It has been well received even in Indonesia, although I understand the Indonesian translation might start once upon a time. I'm not sure. But it is going quite well. Thank you. Bob's Merrill.
One quick question from the other side of the house.
Adele Nathan. Ms. Nathan's question is the relationship of Sukarno with Russia and China and with Kennedy when Kennedy was alive a personal relationship, or is there something else there that goes deeper?
I would say, but when you are dealing with Sukarno, it is a personal relationship. He is an extremely personal man. He takes to feelings and people instantaneously. He will go away from you instantaneously. I realize that you can't govern a shop or a country or a State Department according to whether somebody smiles at you or not. I understand that. But in answer to your question, it is very personal. Sukarno says, you can give me, if you give me $1,000 million and you slap my hand in public, then I have to tell you go to hell. But if you give me just a little piece of banana and you stroke me publicly, then I will love you forever. This is Sukarno. Unfortunately, with Asians in general, I have noticed that they are an extremely personal people. They have felt downtrodden, they have felt that they are second-class citizens, and they will react instantaneously to somebody who can give them warmth. instead of sometimes hardware.
Mr. Yolen?